Well, good morning. Great to see everyone here this morning. And since Brother Cox walked in, I'll get him to give us an update on Diane. I know she's got pneumonia, but one lung. Baptist South, room number, or can she have visitors? Or okay, okay. Room number. Room number 213. Diane's in Baptist South, 213. Pneumonia. Can receive visitors as long as the hospital is still operating the way the hospital is going to operate. So, also need to keep Brother Terry in our prayers. He's scheduled. Are you going back to Birmingham, or supposed to go back Tuesday to Birmingham? I'm going to try to put it off with everything going on. Keep everybody else in your thoughts and prayers that are on the sick and ailing list. We had a wonderful day yesterday. Had 80, my numbers get mixed up. 85, I think, was the final count of the ladies. And from my understanding, you had wonderful lessons, and then you put up with us guys downstairs to try to feed you. So, and I want to thank all those men that helped serve the ladies. I did get some feedback that everything went great downstairs. So, and thank Brother Jeff for running the show. He kept us all in line and did a great job of leading the men down there, getting that job done. So, I think before we begin our class today, after we've gone through the announcements of the sick folks and everything, I would like to address the situation going on with coronavirus. I'm an old head. I'm a mossback. I grew up 100 years ago. If you see this sign on that I had Jay look up and put on the board, that poster was in 1939, and it was posted throughout Britain prior to Britain and Germany getting into their little tussle, because England knew that they was going to send the bombers over and everything else. And so they posted the signs, keep calm, and do what? Carry on. Brother Dave and I was discussing it up here before class, and some of us older folks, including you, Glenda, we have lived through epidemics, we have lived through pandemics, we have lived through polio, we have lived through any number of other things going on, and there has never in my lifetime been the panic that there is over coronavirus. It's a virus. As of 10 hours ago in Alabama, there were now 12 cases. It had doubled from the day before of 6. It is going to continue to double every day, or maybe even grow exponentially until it peaks. Went to the grocery store last night, and Andrew was going through the store. Toilet paper roll shelves were empty. Why? People are in a panic. Why? Because of all the talking heads that they hear, all the social media that they look at that tells them to panic. If they read and understand what coronavirus is, it is a respiratory virus. It is rare that a person has diarrhea with this virus. So why do you want to go out and stockpile toilet paper? My son Jay mentioned yesterday when we was talking about this, he says, I know other sources. And I said, just be sure you can identify poison ivy. Folks, I don't mean to minimize the situation. Coronavirus is a bad virus. It mainly affects those that have a compromised immune system. We do need to take precautions. We do need to do all we can in a calm, sensible manner and not get all excited. Like I say, I grew up in a different age. When people get fearful and when people get panicky, all they're doing is wasting energy. Yes, ma'am. 40s, 50s, 60s, yes, ma'am. And I recall going to a sanatorium, as they called it, to visit an aunt that had tuberculosis. They used to confine them much stricter than they do today. We've all lived through, everybody in this room except one that I can see, maybe two, have lived through the age of HIV and AIDS. It's killed over 1 million people, but they didn't panic and they didn't put them in isolation. So my main point is it dangerous? Absolutely. But why get any more excited over that than you do the flu? Because right now in the United States of America, this flu season, there have been over 32 million cases of flu and over 18,000 people killed from the flu. Are you excited about that? Right now in the state of Alabama, we have 12 coronavirus cases. There is one that is known to be unhealthy and may not come out of it too well, even though they say he's getting better, or she, I don't know who it is. But if the death rate and the sickness rate is no greater than flu, why all the hysteria? The tail's wagging the dog, absolutely. That's possible. We're going to stay off the politics. Yes, sir. So, the best advice that I have for you is go to reliable sources to check your information. Don't get panicked over the talking heads. Do what is necessary for you to do to keep yourself healthy. And I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Brother Terry, I'm going to let you get on yours if you've got anything to add or any bricks to throw at me for what I just said. Okay. Anything else before we begin class? Brother Terry, yes, ma'am. Okay, a friend of Sister Stinson's co-worker lost his leg due to diabetes, so keep that family in your prayers. Brother Jim, lead us in a prayer, please.
Pray that you would be with us as we study and look into your word that we might grow by it. We pray for those that are home that we know that are sick. Pray that you would be with them, be with the doctors and nurses, and recovery might be soon. Be with us this morning as we study. Pray in Christ's name.
Amen. Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15. Today's lesson, we're going to be looking at help God gets along the way of the promise he had made to Abraham. And we're going to start in 15 at verse 12 and sort of fill in some background so we can get off to a running start. Some of this is just reading for information to get us down to some things we'll discuss. Starting with verse 12, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the Euphrates, the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaims and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgasites and the Jebusites. So this is God speaking with Abraham in this manner, showing him things in the future, what was about to take place in a few hundred years. Now, when we get to chapter 16, Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Okay, God had just promised Abram that he would make him a great nation, that all these things were going to happen. Now, chapter 16, verse 1 sets us up to say, how's this going to take place when Abram's wife, Sarah, was barren? They had no kids. So how's all this going to pass down to Abram? And then they had a handmaid, an Egyptian, Hagar. Where did she come from? Now, some of this is going to be a little bit of speculation, reading between the lines, or using rationale to come up with it. But where did Hagar come from, being an Egyptian? Yes, ma'am. Oh, so that would mean that Sarah was an Egyptian? Wasn't Sarah Abram's half-sister? Didn't come from any royalty there, did we? Odds are, if you recall the journey that Abram made when they came to Canaan, there was a famine. They went into Egypt and then they went back. So they could have acquired her for any number of reasons while they were in Egypt and then traveled back. So, but we know that she was an Egyptian. And then Sarah said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. Now, to fill in just a little bit, when they left the land of Ur, they took plenty of people with them, servants, cattle, all like that. They wasn't a poor people. But then when they traveled down to Egypt, they may have picked up some more along the way. Also, how much time has transpired from the time they left Haran until we get to this point right here? They left Haran when Abram was 75 years old. She is about to send Abram into her maid, Hagar, and soon Ishmael is going to be born. And how old is Abram when Ishmael was born? 86. So you give 9 months a year before that, so right at 10 years plus or minus a few months has expired. So what was Abram promised when he was told to leave Haran? Wasn't he promised a great nation, multitudes of people and lands? And now 10 years have passed and none of that has come to be yet. So Sarah is on the point of getting impatient, wondering what's going on. Brother Clarence, you...
Things didn't work out too well. Adam listened to Eve. It didn't work out too good.
If you didn't hear that, Brother Clarence said things didn't work out too well for Adam when he listened to Eve. So, but here we are. So go into her maid. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dealt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abraham, to be his wife. Okay. Anybody got any questions on the wife part with Hagar? Because later on, she's going to be called a concubine. Later on, Abraham's going to give her back to Sarah. How you give your wife to your wife? Correct. And we're going to hopefully get into all that if I didn't take up too much time preaching to you or meddling this morning. But he went in and she conceived. And then as soon as she conceived or knew that she was with child, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Odds are Hagar and Sarah was getting along pretty well before all of this, or else she would not have offered her to her husband. Correct? So what makes all of a sudden the dynamics in the relationship change? I'm sorry? I don't know if I want to go down that road or not. He said a pregnant woman's not easy to get along with. Sarah, well, we'll find out in a verse later that Sarah thought Abraham was going to be. Well, let's just read that and then we'll talk about it. Verse 5, and Sarah said unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. She admitted she was wrong in giving Hagar to him to wife, but now says that my wrong is your fault. My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between me and thee. So, in Hagar's mind anyway, more than likely, again, like I say, some of this you've got to draw some conclusions on. But what happened in that culture at that time when it came to multiple wives and children, and favored wives and unfavored wives and children? Jealousy. Sarah thought that because Hagar was now going to have a child, that Abraham would favor her because she had a child, whereas Sarah couldn't have a child. Whose fault was it? Not Abraham's? Whose fault was it that Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham to wife? That's a simple question. Whose fault was it? Pardon? let's rip the blanket in two and look at it one side at a time. It was totally Sarah's fault that she decided to give Hagar to Abraham. Now I'm going to flip the question around. Whose fault was it that Abraham took Hagar to use as a wife? That's Abraham. So they're both at fault, but Hagar, her role in this is jealousy, creating jealousy there and animosity. Also, in that culture, the people, the number one son would get more of the estate than the number 2, 3, and 4. Also, there was a hierarchy. There was the main wife and the second wives on down. So the main wife had more authority and more privilege than 2, 3, and 4. And the concubines were lower than that. Now, because a concubine was, in a technical sense, not a wife. So there were actually 3 levels that they could deal with. They had their number 1 wife, the secondary wives, and the concubines. If you go over into the David, for instance, had how many wives and how many concubines, and so we can see where all those numbers roll in together there. So, but in Sarah's eyes, because now Hagar was with child and was going to have a child, she would be more favored in Abraham's eyes than she would. Questions, comments? And that's the other part of the equation, because Abraham's going to give her back. So the maids in those days were not just paid servants, they were property. Because Abraham is going to tell her, she's yours, do with her what you please. You don't tell people to do that to people, you tell people to do that with property. It's your property, do with it what you want to. So that shows that Hagar is on a lower level than Sarah. And then after Sarah had gotten on to Abraham and told him he was at fault, the next verse says just what I said. Abraham said unto Sarah, behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Sur. If you recall the map that I put up last week, I believe it was, and showed you where Sur was, it was sort of on the south of Beersheba. It was on the road to Egypt. So she could have been going to make her way back home, back to Egypt. But when they found her in the way to Sur, the angel said to her, Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence comest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress, Sarah. Didn't bring up my husband, Abraham. I only talked about Sarah. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. I'm going to pause there on verse 12 for just a second. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's against him. Can we look at the situation in the Middle East today and say that this is still going on? Is there peace in the Middle East? If you take Iran, Iraq, Even Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Libya. Doubt the Quran describes it this way. But can you name a period of time in history where there has ever been peace in that region of the world, where there's not been fighting going on? When nobody was there? It goes back a long way, don't it? Precedes what we're reading here. Okay. Verse 13, and she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me, for she said, Here I also have looked after him that seeth me. Wherefore the well was called Beersheba. I'm having trouble focusing my eyeballs today. Beer Lahorai, behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered, and Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael, and Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael. From here we go on to start a different story, but so we're going to pick up in verse 18 of chapter 17, where it says, and Abraham, by this time Abram's name is changed to Abraham, so I can stop flipping back and forth. Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. If you recall, Abraham had at one point said that a certain servant that had been born in his house was all he had to leave his property to. And God told him, no, it would be one of your sons. At this point, the only one he's had is Ishmael. So he says that he's wanting Ishmael to be the favored one. Verse 20 says, and as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. 23. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day, as God had said unto him. And Abraham was 90 years old and 9 when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. This is a very important passage because it gives you ages, timelines and ages. Abraham is 99 years old at this point. His son is 13 years old at this point. When we look into future chapters, we will see where Hagar is taking her son and leaving, and the way it is worded, it appears as though he is an infant. She takes him in her arms, etc., carries him, looks after him. But here, he's 13. How old is he when Isaac is born? Have to be 14 or 15. And it says that Sarah saw him mocking when Isaac was weaned. At what time did that take place? In that time period, when were children weaned or taken off of mother's milk and put on real food? 2 to 3 years old. Most say that it was probably 3 years old, but 2 to 3 years old. So if he's 14, 15 when he's born, 2 years later, 3 years later, he's how old when he's mocking, making fun of him, and he and his mother are told to leave? 16, 17, give or take a little bit of time. So when we get into that section, it's not like that she is having to pick up an infant and take care of an infant. Let's now skip over to chapter 21, because the rest of this gets into Sodom, Gomorrah, angels visiting, Sodom destroyed, etc. And we pick up in, when we're dealing just with Ishmael and Hagar, it picks up in verse 8 of chapter 21. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. Can you just imagine, even though God had said Isaac was the favored son, Isaac was going to be the one that all of the multitude and everything was going to come through, the man still had a son by Hagar. At this point, 16, 17 years old. What is the father's, would be a father's emotional state with a 17-year-old? You've got 16, 17, 18 now years old, right? 15, 16, 18. Jackie tell you to send one of them away, what would be your fatherly instinct reaction? I got you on camera saying. So you can see Abraham's dilemma, but yet, yes, ma'am. That's correct. We're still working on God's plan. Pick up with verse 12. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So, time after time, God has to come back to Abraham and reinforce the idea of what's going to take place. And also in this particular verse, it calls Hagar the bondwoman. And still, even with the connection of the son involved, the bondwoman, and technically speaking, and even though it's Abraham's son, it is still Sarah's call to make. Hagar belongs to Sarah. Hagar's son belongs to Sarah. So Sarah makes the call that this is going to take place. So God comes back and reinforces his idea, his plan from the beginning, that Isaac was going to be the one. And so verse 14, Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water, gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Apparently she got lost or misplaced. I've told people I've been in the woods a lot, on the water a lot. I have never been lost, but I've been temporarily misplaced a few times. But, and back in those days, and even to this day in that region of the world, they don't carry a stockpile of stuff with them. Water, for instance, they take enough water to get from point A to the next watering hole, pick up enough to get to the next watering hole. So when Abraham provided her with food and drink, it was to get her on her journey and keep her safe. But she wandered around, so she apparently missed the next watering hole. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. Now, if you just read that verse, and that's why I spent so much time talking about his age, if you just read this one verse, she cast the child under the shrub, what would be your thought about the age of the son? a child, toddler, young person, not a teenager, an older teenager at that. So, right. You just send them on their way. And she went and sat down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot, for she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. She didn't want to eyewitness him dying, so she removed herself and went to another place, and it calls it a bow shot. If any of you have ever hunted with a bow, they were better than us. I'll put it that way. And they would generally use long bows instead of what we use today, compound bows. Now we get more velocity and all, but still, we're probably talking in the range of 100 yards plus or minus a few yards there. But she was far enough off that you could still see the image, but not see the facial characteristics. Watch him die. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thy hand, for I will make him a great nation. Verse 21, and he dwelt, and then they got water. And what it means there by lift up the lad and hold him in thy hand is probably when she was giving him water. What do you do with a person that is down when you try to give them water? You sort of hold their head up. You don't just open their mouth and pour it in, right? So she was trying to assist him in getting some water in. And then verse 21, he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Now, if we'll slide over to chapter 23, we'll go through some other stuff here about Isaac being offered as a sacrifice and all, and to pick up with Ishmael, we'll go over to chapter 23 and verse 1. Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. The reason I wanted to stop here is they sent him away when he was 16 or 17, but how old was he when Sarah died? You're going to have to do some math. If Abraham was 86 years old, how old was Sarah when he was born? Abraham was 10 years older, so she would have been 76 years old. So if you subtract 76 from 127, what do you get? Sorry? About 50, 51. So he was getting on up there in age at that time, wasn't he? And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, in the same Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Now we'll get over to chapter 25. Because between that and chapter 25, we deal with Isaac, Rebekah, and all. So we're going to pick up in verse 7 of chapter 25. And these are the days of years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 and 15, which would make him how old? 175. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. So how old? We know that Isaac would have been how old? How old was Abraham when Isaac was born? 100. He died at 175, so that makes Isaac 75 years old, plus or minus a little bit. Ishmael was how much older than Isaac? about 14 years old. So you add 14 and 75, what do you get? 89, 90 years old, somewhere right in that range. So now he's getting to be an old man. And then when we get to verse 12, it says, now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Abiel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jether, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he gave up the ghost and died and was gathered to his people. So he died at 137. That means he lived about 47 years after he buried his father, Abraham. Yes, sir. And that was back in chapter 23 and verse 1, was it? Sarah was she was 127. 127. Okay. Now, the reason I went through it the way I did and getting down to the 12 princes of Hagar, not 12 princes of Hagar, but 12 princes that Ishmael had. From the very beginning, God had a plan. And God's plan was that through Isaac, there was going to be a great nation. When Sarah got impatient and intervened or tried to help with God's plan, we see the immediate problem between Sarah and her handmaid. It's often, there's a movie, one of my favorite movies by John Wayne, The Quiet Man, where it talks about, gets into this situation where a matchmaker is trying to tell a guy that he needs to let his sister marry and get out of the house, because what woman would want to come into the house and have two women in the same house, particularly one that was a redhead? So that's not me talking. That's a line in the movie. Now, don't. But pardon? Maureen O'Hara. But the issue was that, and I don't understand today how some of the polygamous people get along. How can wives not be jealous of other wives? How does that work? I don't understand it. But there was that immediate confusion that went on between the women because of all of that. But if Sarah had not done that, and Ishmael had not had these 12 kids and a great nation, there would not be that region of the world now, the Islamic nation, that, as Brother Clint's, the Quran that they go by. And as we've already said, there's never been peace in that part of the world. And so through Abraham, not by God's wishes, but because they intervened and helped God, there was the religion of Islam. Now, through Abraham and through Isaac, there was the religion of Judaism. And today, through Abraham, Isaac, and through that chain, because Christ came from the lineage down through there, there's Christianity. So from Abraham, there was what God had planned was through Abraham that there would be Judaism through the Old Testament and get them prepared for Christianity. But because of intervention by Sarah, now there was that other branch, Islam. Questions, comments? Yes, sir. it was very prevalent back in those days for them to have multiples. Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for your attention, your comments.